Yeah, I think it makes sense for us to get started now. We've given everyone 5 minutes to join. A recording of this will be made available to people afterwards as well. So if you don't wish to be seen or heard on camera, you've been warned. Yeah, we will get started. Let's hope that this works. So as you can see on the timeline there, this is kind of the timeline for the competition. So competition obviously opened just over a month ago now. We are the third line down, DSIT commercial and finance teaching. That's where we are today. As of today, there's still kind of between 2 and 3 weeks to get your clarification questions in, should you wish to send them in writing. Details of how to do so can be found on the competition pages on gov.uk. The competition closes at 1 minute to midnight on the 23rd of May 2023, but I would encourage people to ensure that they are trying to submit well in advance of that deadline, because we're using a portal and it will close to any submissions after that time, and we will not be able to take submissions that come after that date, because it wouldn't be fair on everyone else that has met the deadline. We will then go through evaluation and moderation and seek to let successful applicants know by the end of June 2023, with a view to funding starting in September 2023, which is subject to successful applicants' completion of pre-grant requirements and signing the grant funding agreement, which is one of the things we're going to talk about today. So without further ado, we've sort of gone straight into the meat of the thing. There are 2 slides that I'll be talking through, and a few slides that colleagues in finance are talking through. So to introduce myself, my name is Dale Cox. I've been commercial lead in the Future Networks programme for a couple of years. I will be departing prior to the signatures on this, but I will be making a return to support the evaluation of the project. So make the use of me today if you've got any burning questions that require input or want some institutional memory to come out on the commercial side of things. So our grant funding agreement is published as part of the competition documents on gov.uk. So if you navigate to the competition pages, there will be a link to that, and you can review it and let us know if there are any questions that arise from doing so. The agreement is to be signed by the lead partner only, and the terms of that agreement are flowed down through the collaboration agreement to all of the partners within the grant funding. We will not make changes to this agreement. So if you do have significant queries or concerns about the GFA, please get those into us while the clarification questions are open. We've kind of been through iterations of this grant funding agreement. We're generally very friendly as a managing authority, and we've never had to use a big stick to enforce any of our grant funding agreement terms. So think about us as a trusted partner rather than someone that's going to, hit you hard with the terms of the grant funding agreement. And it has been kind of used very successfully both in Future Networks programme and through 5GTT previously. The GFA includes a template for a collaboration agreement between the lead partner and the other partners. If you use this as the basis for your collaboration agreement, that will speed things up, because checking it from our side will be quicker, but it's not a requirement that you do so. The requirement is that your collaboration agreement meets the minimum standards for a collaboration agreement, which is set out in the GFA. That is literally all I'm going to say about the GFA at the moment. I did think about going through kind of clause by clause, but you'd be here for 3 hours and extremely bored if we did that. So just moving forwards. The second section that's the responsibility of my team is the commercial form. So if you've bid into our competitions previously, this would have been called the finance form. So this document breaks down your spend profile to a more granular level. So there are worksheets in the Excel file that break down on each of the allowable spend categories. See the competition supporting documents, but in brief, those are labour costs, overhead, materials, subcontractors, capital usage items, other costs, and there is probably one that I am missing, but I don't think so. My advice on this one is to follow the instructions. You can't go wrong, or can you? Well, to be honest, you can go wrong, and the way that you avoid going wrong is that you make the inputs easy to understand. If your organization has imaginative job titles for any of your people, and I have seen chief evangelist in the past, spell it out. We need to understand what the role is on the project. Otherwise, we're going to come back to you with questions. And if you'd have just written it into the box to start off with, you wouldn't receive any clarifications from us after your successful bid. Spend on materials and capital usage should be broken down appropriately. This doesn't need to be down to kind of, these are all of the consumables that we're buying, but a blanket categorization of hardware would be insufficient, and depreciation and residual value should be considered. So materials, generally speaking, we'd expect that to be more on the consumable side of things. Where there are items that you're depreciating through your own capital policy, that being capital usage, but also if you do not declare significant items as a capital asset, but there will be residual value come the end of the project, we'd appreciate it if you could put those items in the capital usage tab as well. And as I've touched on, we'll review all finance forms for all partners and ask questions as appropriate. And then the kind of warning sign, which Mark, Lee, and finance colleagues will talk about a bit more, is that you should wait until these forms are agreed before completing your cash flow profile. So in the past, we've had a lot of partners who've kind of been very proactive, completed their cash flow profile nice and early, but then through the question and answers that have come out of the commercial form, there have been changes within the commercial forms, which then need to be reflected in the cash flow profile. And where there's small changes in one place and another, it makes it very difficult to track that through to a cash flow profile. So wait until these are agreed by DSIT colleagues before you work on the cash flow profile. And that is all from me for the time being. So I'm going to hand over to Mark to talk through the finance things. I think Mark might have to be doing a Professor Chris Whitty and saying next slide, please. So if you do that, I will GG.
Will do. Thanks a lot, Dale.
Hold on, I have one more slide.
Oh,
I'd forgotten I'd written this one. So this is just to say that successful applicants are subject to additional checks, some of them on the finance side and some on the commercial side. So on the commercial side, we'll look at each individual partner in relation to adverse media, its ownership, and then check through the government grant functions spotlight system in order to minimise risks to the department. Where there are issues identified, DSIT may refer to other government departments and agencies to verify information and run additional checks. So this would be where we can't work out your beneficial ownership or similar through standard checks and openly accessible information. We might reach out to colleagues elsewhere that are able to access information that is not publicly available. The department retains a right to withdraw its offer of funding in the instance that there are significant risks or issues identified through this process. I will now hand over to Mark, and sorry for priming you early.
All right, thanks a lot, Dale. Hopefully no more hidden slides. So hi everyone, I'm Mark Halstead and I'm one of the finance leads on the Future Networks programme. And today I'm also with Lee and Priyanka, who are the other two finance leads. And we're going to talk to you a little bit about the main finance requirements that we've got for projects to fill in order for them to get to the signing of their grant funding agreement. We'd like for this to be an overview of the principles behind your forecasting and behind your due diligence, rather than a super in-depth look through the forms and a walkthrough. But we'll have some time at the end as well to ask questions for Dale as well, if you've got any. So we've put together a brief flowchart here, proving that I'm wasted in finance and should be in modern art, which effectively just lays out what Dale has just gone over, which is your commercial form should feed into your cash flow profile, which Prank is going to talk through a bit more shortly. And then in parallel to that process, we have the due diligence forms. So effectively, once those two forms are completed, then you'll be able to move on to your grant funding agreement signing. So after that short and sweet summary, I'm going to hand over to Lee, who's going to go into a bit more detail on the due diligence.
Hi folks, hi. I'm Lee Vasey, and as Mark said, one of the jointly lead the finance team here. So yeah, I'm going to talk through due diligence. Dale, do you have control of the slides here?
I do. Just say next slide, please.
Okay. Oh well, yeah. At some point, Dale, would it be possible for me to take over a presentation and share a different view with people?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I'll say when I'm going to do that as well. But if we could have the next slide, please, that'd be great. Cool. So as an overview of this, we request completion of due diligence for all funded partners in a consortium. So by consortium, we mean collaboration agreement. Those two terms can be sort of interchanged a little bit. Effectively, anybody who is receiving flowed through grant funds. So not your suppliers, but the organisations that are part of the grant agreement. Those ones. So if you're subcontracted to someone, we don't need due diligence on your subcontractors. It's just those that are in receipt of grant funds directly flowed through the lead partner. The kind of requirements for universities and local authorities, we're a bit lighter on them. There's only kind of one section of the form that we require them to fill in, and I'll show you what that is. And the reason we do due diligence is to assess the financial stability of all the partners, with a view to, one, making sure they don't become overly reliant on government funding. We don't want to be we don't want organisations to face a cliff edge effectively when grant funding wraps up from government. And then we're also looking for indications that they've got the capability to actually manage the project finances that will be passed on to them. It mentions here we'll request a copy of latest accounts, but that's a fairly easy thing to pick up. Next slide, please, Dale. Thanks. Yeah, so this is an overview of what we're about to look at. So it's split into different coloured sections. So green section is just basic info. Then we get into, there's a blue section for doing some turnover checks and asset, sort of current asset liability position. And then there's a section at the end in purple and pink, which are related to requirements under subsidy control regulations. So that's looking at ailing and insolvent organisations. That can feel a bit like duplication, but we have to ask those questions in that way as a result of requirements placed on us. It can, going through these, we'll see it can look like there's a lot of questions, and the intention is not to trip up organisations. There are a lot. We've set this out in a way that it looks like there's a lot of questions, because we're trying to give every organisation the opportunity to clear our due diligence checks at the first attempt. So there's a lot of if you answer no to this question, answer this follow-on question, and the follow-on question is there to try and give everybody the opportunity to tell us what we need to know to pass you through at the first attempt. We're trying to minimise the amount of to and fro between organisations that we might have to go into. So try to reduce clarification questions, basically. Dale, if you could go on to the next slide, please. Right, so actually here, I'm going to present a different view. Some of these slides, I think we've had some version control issues here potentially. So I'm going to show you the actual template that you'll receive, and I'll speak to that. So I'm just going to take over the presentation, okay, Dale?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Here we go. Is that, let's just see, have we got a, yeah, that's a decent size. It looks like, well, from what I can see, it looks like it's a good size for people to see. If it is small, please shout out and I'll see if I can make it bigger on my side. So the first section is a green section, and it's basic company information. So all organisations receiving funding through the grant agreement should complete this. We have, so I'll just go along so you can kind of see how far it runs across. It goes across to question 4. In fact, I'm going to start on question 4. That's a less intuitive part of it. We're just asking each organisation to confirm that any funding they receive from DCM, sorry, not say, it says DCMS, DSIT, need to update that. Any funding received from DSIT will be used to deliver the R&D project that you've described in your application. It seems like a bit of an odd question to ask. It's really just to create that audit trail. So we've got your confirmation saying any money you give us will be for this project. Gary, I'll come back into your, I'll look at the question in a second. Bear with me, please. Going into looking at questions, excuse me, question 3 on here. So for each of the organisations, we'd like to know how much funding they're requesting through your current application. So here, as an example, I've said there's the Acme Corporation are asking for £500,000 related to the one project, and it should say diversification if I could spell. And we're also asking for details of any other projects that they are currently funded, in which they've received funding from DSIT. So it could be, for example, that Acme are already on this hypothetical diversification project, and we'd want to see the total amount of expenditure. So we're trying to get a picture of the total amount that DSIT have committed to that particular organisation. So you could just add an extra row for each project that that particular organisation receives funding through. Just have a look at, bear with me a sec, I'll just have a look at Gary's question there. This project. So Gary, yeah, on that, let's clarify that one. It's not just the lead organisation, it's the lead organisation plus any organisations that they are going to flow funding through to. So those would be the organisations who sign, whether you call it the consortium agreement or the collaboration agreement, it would be the signatories to that. So any organisation that's going to receive funding as a result of being a signatory to that agreement, that's who we need to capture on here. So it's not just where the funding relationship exists between DCMS and the lead partner, it's also the organisations that the funding is going to be flowed through to. Great, thanks. So moving on to the blue section, I note here that this section doesn't need to be completed by universities and we've got the universities and local public sector organisations. That's generally local authorities. So these checks look at your turnover and your net current asset liability position. So we don't need that information for universities and public sector organisations. It's just the sort of private enterprises that are, well, I say private, but the enterprises that are involved in the consortium agreement. So here we're asking about turnover. I won't get into the absolute specifics here, but yeah, we're looking for an indication of turnover, and if there's a description there, so it's effectively if you're asking for more in a year from DSIT than you receive in turnover from elsewhere, then we would look for some more information from you. Effectively, through question 6, we allow organisations to kind of rely on parent companies or some other sources to meet our turnover requirements. So if you're, because we understand that a lot of organisations who we end up working with for our projects, a lot of them are pre-revenue, they're still at kind of investment stages of their growth. So we will have a lot of organisations that don't necessarily meet the turnover threshold. So these questions are there to try and give you the opportunity to provide us some more reassurance. Likewise, take a similar approach with the current assets, current liabilities ratio. We're looking for that to be positive. We want to see net asset position. If there are actually net current liabilities, then again, there's a few questions here which will help you to give us enough information to give us that comfort. And question 9, again, similarly, it's a bit of a follow-on to the asset questions. There's a question here, question 10, it's under column U. This is just for the lead partners. So it's asking here, if one of the partners were to drop out, what would be the backup plan? What mitigations do you have in place, or would be feasible in future if someone were to drop out? So that one's just for the lead partner. And moving on to the final section, these are the questions that are kind of required under subsidy control regulations. The questions are fairly self-explanatory when you go through it. Again, universities and public sector organisations don't need to respond to this. There's some guidance in here as well. So there's a tab, read me, notes on ailing, and it's what ailing and insolvent organisations. These requirements all come out of the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement. So we've linked in there to some guidance there, which should help you and your colleagues understand what's needed here. And then the final 2 questions here, again, you'll probably need your finance colleagues to help you with this one, but it's to do with kind of total liabilities to shareholders' equity ratios and EBITDA to total interest payment ratios. Again, I'm sure your finance colleagues will be able to help you to respond to those. But for this last section, I absolutely would recommend involving finance professionals within your organisations to cover these ones off. Okay, I shall stop presenting. Dale, do you want to bring your slides back in? Actually, and I'll just while you're doing that, I'll have a look. Let's see, I've got a question here from Sarah on question 3 on the green section. Yes, that's right. Yeah, just the live projects. If you've got old projects, that's fine. We're just interested in kind of the live position. Thank you. I think that's probably it from me, but absolutely open questions at the once Priyanka's covered off her section. Thanks.
Hi everyone, I'm Priyanka, so jointly head up the finance function in our program with Mark and Lee. So I'm going to talk a bit about the cash flow profile. So this is the document that was previously mentioned. You should wait to complete this until the commercial form has been, our commercial team are happy with the commercial form, and then begin filling this out. So this is one of our, along with the due diligence, the cash flow profile is our second requirement in getting to GFA on the finance side. And so you can see it says there, the profile should match the commercial forms. So the commercial forms will give you a split, I think, of what you'll spend in each financial year, what you'll spend against each expenditure category, and what you'll spend in total. The aim is to basically reflect this on the cash flow profile. We will have more sessions on this, but this is just a summary, so you have an idea when you're doing your application of how these things might link in together and what you might eventually need to fill out. So the first profile that you do fill out matches that commercial finance, that commercial form that's been approved. The two should match exactly, and that first forecast you receive will become your baseline forecast. So that will be the spend broken down into different claim periods, showing us detail of what expenditure categories you're going to spend on. Then each time you submit a grant claim, or if there's anything important that happens on the project, like a change request, another cash flow profile will be filled out. So we'll see the changing landscape from that baseline forecast over the duration of the project lifetime. Dale, do you mind going to the next slide, please? So this is a screenshot of the input tab, or one of the input tabs. So each time you provide a forecast, there'll be a blank tab like this for you to fill out. You'll see those expenditure categories there, which will be set each time. The only area you need to fill out is that yellow section, and that's just splitting your expenditure between these expenditure categories and making sure you're putting it against the right claim number, and that claim period is correct for you. The blue cells will automatically work out what your state aid is, so what the DCMS grant you would receive from this particular expenditure item, and what you would have to find yourself from that. Yep, so that's being explained in a bit more detail on the slide. I think I'm done with this one. The next slide, please, Dale. So once you fill out the input tabs, this is a screenshot now of the front sheet of the cash flow profile tab. So when you fill out the input tabs, the numbers will flow through to this front page, and we'll be able to see all your claim amounts for each reforecast that you've done are lined up. So the yellow sections here, again, are bits for you to fill out. You can see that that's sort of looking at the claim period. So the total funding you get broken down into however many claims that you're going to have with a start and end date for each claim period. So the 2 grant claims, I'll just say, should never cover the same grant, the same period of time. And I'll also say that all grant claims should end at the 31st of March, with the next one starting at the 1st of April. But that is a bit more detail than I want to give you right now. We'll go through that in another session if you're successful. Okay, fine. Next tab there. Okay, so then general advice. So the cash flow profile, while it's not difficult to fill out, obviously it's the financial plan of the project. So we would strongly recommend having a finance professional ready to go right from the beginning of the project. It will be handy to have that person from doing the application perhaps and doing the cash flow profile, and everything will tie together nicely. Also, another thing to point out is that projects do tend to underspend in their first year. So when providing your first forecast, whether in the application or the first cash flow profile, bear that in mind, and be more realistic about how much you think is actually going to be spent than optimistic and thinking that lots will be, will go out that door that particular financial year. Not that it cannot happen. It's just based on all the experience we have of lots of projects, that there's normally quite a bit of underspend in the first financial year. It is also difficult for us to then move funding from one financial year to another. So please do bear that in mind. We'll look at the plan of funding that you have, and then it will be difficult if something is delayed to say, oh yeah, we can just move that to the next financial year. We have quite strict allocated budgets each year. So yeah, and then final point on this, I'd say, is we will go through each of the requirements in more detail after the application stage. This is just a general summary at the moment that should help you fill out the application and know what to expect after that. Haley, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to add on the point you mentioned about how difficult it is to move money between years. It's particularly difficult for us to move money into a later financial year. It's a bit easier for us to move money forward. So to bring it, from a later financial year, so bringing money from 24-25 into 23-24 will be more, that will be an easier decision for DSIT to make, just due to kind of, other budgetary pressures that we have. You might want to bear that in mind when you are working on the wider project forecast.
I think thinking about this stuff really early now in doing an application will be really helpful. Like when you become successful in filling that cash flow profile out, because you will have already thought about your forecast in some detail. But yeah, I think that closes off my area. Any questions? Let's have a look on the side. That dealt with, is it different if the lead partner is a local authority? Okay, so generally that should not be included in your cash flow profiles or things that you claim from us. If you're, I think there is circumstance under it's non-recoverable VAT, rightly? Those organizations can include that in their grant claims, but most organizations you should put, we will check your grant claims and perhaps look at the invoice amount when we're doing our spot checks when we get to that point, and we'll always look for the fact that that has not been included in that claim line and that you've put the amount pre-VAT from the invoice in.
Yeah, the two categories of things. So if it's irrecoverable VAT, then you can claim
yes,
it through,
unless
through
you're
and also if the organisation isn't VAT registered. So if in the unlikely event you have an organisation within your consortium or collaboration that's not VAT registered, it has happened a few times. I think it's only a couple of times I've seen that. If they're not VAT registered, then they can claim VAT through us.
Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, there's one here from Barney Smith, which is, are contributions in kind eligible for match funding? And I think the answer here is that it sort of depends. So if you are talking about contributions in kind in terms of like use of capital equipment, that absolutely could be inputted into the finance form for pre-existing plant materials to be used and recovered against. But by and large, we expect everything that's claimed against to be an incurred cost. So you need to incur the cost in order to recover it from the department. Again, should anyone wish to submit further questions, bottom right-hand side of your screen, there's a button that says activities and there's Q&A in there. So yeah, just pop your questions in and we'll answer them as quickly as we can.
While people are thinking of questions to put in, or if there's anything coming, the one point I might add, and that would be to stress our experience of projects where it's been easier for them to work with us and easier for us to work with them. And so those that have been, had a better experience of that have generally had more capability on the finance side. So we'd strongly encourage you within your bid to cost in a finance professional into it. It's recoverable back through the grant. You might structure it in a way where that finance professional sits in the organisation who's got the highest subsidy controls percentage, so as to reduce the cost to your organisations. You might want to structure it that way. It's up to you, but absolutely look at how you can really ensure you've got a finance professional on there. Those organisations that have started out with less capability in that space have generally struggled. They're the ones who have, it's taken them longer to sign the grant agreement, and they've had their interactions on making sort of change requests and that kind of thing in the future have been more difficult and taken longer. So I'd absolutely cost it out and look for the most efficient way to pass that cost on to the grant funder. We're open to that because we can see it's beneficial for both sides in terms of using our time efficiently. It looks like we had something in the Q&A there.
It's just over in the messages rather than the Q&A itself.
Oh, yeah.
Could a proposal be acceptable if funding requested is split over the multiple phases, 1, 2, 3, where a decision to proceed with each phase is dependent upon the successful completion of the previous phase? I mean, there is an ability for grant funding agreements to stop. So we'd rather kind of have a complete plan for phases 1, 2, 3. So we'll be assessing what you submit on the basis of the totality of it. So you couldn't have a phase 1 that's really well explained and then phases 2 and 3 which are a bit more fluffy. It'd probably score very poorly in terms of the bid itself. But if during the delivery of the program you were to decide that you wanted to finish at the end of kind of a milestone because you didn't see any kind of future for it. The GFA does contain provisions for either party to terminate subject to agreement. So you can structure it that way internally, but you should still give us a reasonable amount of information in the bid. It'd not be in your best interest to have a bid that's sort of like very detailed up to a point and then less well defined after that. Trying to think if there's any other particular pieces of advice that we've learned. So when it comes to the getting to GFA, one of the documents that will be shared with successful applicants is called the Completion or Finalisation Guide. If you work through that document, start to end, and complete all of the boxes in there and attach the relevant documents, you will provide everything that's needed to get end to end. And if you do it as one big bang, it'll probably feel like it's going faster because you're not having so many touch points and conversations with DSIT along the way. I think we're also going to look to have a conversation with every successful applicant at the start of the process to walk them through and kind of get any questions answered, share how we like to work with one another. But given that we're hoping to fund up to 30 projects, this will probably kind of be 30 minutes to an hour for a project rather than kind of, you know, a really good chunk where we can work through any issues all the way from start to finish. Anything else from your perspective, finance guys?
I think that was all on the cash flow profile for now.
On the due diligence stuff, I'd say it's often the case in a within a consortium or collaboration agreement that you'll have some partners who are more responsive to the questions than others. I'd suggest don't wait until you have complete responses from all of the partners to submit your due diligence stuff. I'd recommend getting through what you can, you know, on a weekly basis or something like that. Then we can avoid, you know, it reduces the opportunity for kind of last minute issues cropping up. Yeah, so get through what you can almost as soon as you can, really, in terms of due diligence. I see a question came in there. Can we point to where the VAT thing's set out in detail? I think that would be within the guidance that's gone out with the competition. I think we could. Are we going to? I think we could follow up after this meeting with a few kind of clarifications. We can point to where that is in the guidance. I expect within that. Does that sound feasible, Dale? Yeah,
I think so. Like we can take some of the questions and make sure that it's put in the clarification logs. So keep your eye out on that log, which I think is published every Friday, an updated version on the competition pages. It might be next Friday, but all the VAT advice will say is that that is not a claimable cost unless it's unrecoverable VAT. So this is on the basis of costs incurred by you. If you incur the cost of that, but you're able to claim it back as per usual accounting practices, that wouldn't be claimable. If it's irrecoverable, it is. It's really, I don't think the guidance is going to say a huge amount more than that. I did see another question.
Question was where can we get the where will the recording be available?
That is a good question. I believe it will be on the competition pages as well. A link will be made available on there. And if it isn't, if it's not come up in the next couple of days, if you email the mailbox and remind them, I'm sure that they'll make it available to you almost immediately.
If, like me, people on the call suddenly get an excellent question just after we've hung up, how can they get that into us, Dale? Is there a clarification process?
Yeah, so clarification should go into the mailbox. I am just going to open the competition webpage and confirm it is onp.enquiries@dcms.gov.uk. I'll just drop a link into the sidebar there. And all of the guidance is on the web page, which I will also drop a link to, but I imagine that you've all seen it and that's how you've ended up here. Any final questions for anyone? Sounds like we might be in a good place to bring this to a close. I guess the only thing that's left for me to say off the back of this is best of luck to anyone that is bidding. As we say, the clarification questions are open until the 9th of May. If there is anything that's unclear, get your questions into that mailbox and they will be answered, and all answers will be published for the benefit of everyone on this call and every organisation that might be interested in bidding. So thank you very much for attending. We hope that you found it useful and look forward to evaluating some really strong bids. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.